Hey, this is Jordon Bourgeault from JBo Airbrush, and you are watching a time-lapse tutorial on how I painted the Star Wars The Force Awakens shoes that I did for Airbrush Action Magazine. I've already masked off the soles and the inner lining of the shoes, and now I'm going to cover the entire surface area of the shoe in masking tape so that I can draw and cut my designs. Using my computer, I now size and trace the characters that I'm going to put on the shoe. I then flip the paper and, using the light table, scribble over the lines on the other side of the page so I can use it as a transfer trace. I now lay out and trace the outlines of the characters onto the shoe. I only go over the outlines of the different colored sections. I don't need any details yet, but I'll keep my drawings to add the details later. I now go around and cut along all of the outlines. I'm careful not to push too hard because I don't want to damage the shoe underneath. I now section by section remove the tape, putting it down somewhere to salvage it so that when I finish painting that section, I can remask the area and move on to the next. If the sections are the same color or close, I may do more than one section at once to help save time. As you can see, this is where I bring back my drawings and add any details. If there's any important features that I need, I'll retrace them on and everything will be lined up properly. This is particularly important in the faces. Before I remask a completed section, I like to put a dot on the masking tape so that I know that I've completed that section. On a job like this, where there isn't very many different sections, it's probably not that necessary, but sometimes there's several different cutouts and it can get very confusing. When I'm mixing colors, I look closely at the reference and I start my base color with about the lightest shade that I can see in the reference photo. For the less important sections like the clothing and the armor, I try and minimize my color steps to about 3 or 4. But on the more important areas like the characters and the faces, I probably mix about 7 or 8 different colors. For faces, one of the really important things is the mouth. And for Ray, I was having trouble with it a little bit, so I had to kind of keep going over and working the mouth until I was happy with it, and it made it look quite a bit more like her. When I'm laying out my base color, I don't just spray it on completely opaque because then I would lose all the details that I traced out. So I work with the details, and that way when I move on to my next steps, I'm not completely lost on my layout. I just keep working darker and darker, and each time you get to a darker color step, there ends up being less of it. So by the end of it, when you're working all the way black, you'll just be dotting the pupils and some of the darkest ridges. Once I've worked all the way to dark, I come back in with highlights. I remask Finn and move on to Chewbacca. Even though I'm painting fur now instead of skin, the steps are exactly the same. I start from light, laying everything out, work the colors to darker, and once I've got all the colors in there and the darkest shadow bits in there, I come back in with highlights. Remask and move on. If there's a section that I see that the entire area is going to go darker than the color step that I'm currently on, then there's no point in even me filling in that area. I'll just leave it blank and then base it later with the lightest color in that section. Harrison Ford is such an iconic guy and such a notable looking character that it's very important that I make this look just like him. And you can see at first it doesn't really look quite bang on, but as I start going through and through more color steps, making slight adjustments and tweaking it, by the end, especially once I add the highlights, it finally does start to look like him. When I'm painting shoes, I always kind of like to add something cool to the heel of the shoe. Design-wise, I think it pulls everything together as opposed to just putting something on the toe, leaving the rest of the shoe blank. So it's fitting for the Star Wars shoes that I'll put the Millennium Falcon on one heel and an X-Wing on the other. I now add a smaller silhouette character on the side. I freehand in the forest scene behind him, and you can see how leaving the character masked while I did that created a nice silhouette and leaving the shape of him quite bold. I now do the same thing for the burnt Darth Vader mask. In the reference photo, the mask is on a display case, so I freehand in those shapes and then use paper as a stencil to sharpen the lines. I now use my vinyl cutter to cut out the Star Wars font. I put the Force Awakens over white, spray yellow, put the Star Wars logo over top of that, and spray it black. Then I add stars and peel off all the vinyl. For the background of the characters and the ships, I did a desert scene with blue sky. I now unmask everything, and you can see from the sharp cut lines that all the edges are a little unnatural looking. So I come back in with some of the darker and highlight colors and re-hit all the edges. I also add some small details and loose hair, come back in with some even brighter highlights as a final touch.